Alright, what's up everybody? Back with another edition of Everyday Hoops. Hope you guys are having a good one. So there are about 5-ish games left in the NBA season. Not every team has the same number of games, but there's around 5-ish games left. So we're looking at the playoffs, looking at the races that are going on and seeing who's making it and who's not making it. Alright. Yeah. Thank you guys for the views on the vids and the shorts recently. Really appreciate it. It's April, and at the end of the regular season, we're gonna have a new series coming out. I'm gonna tell you more about that later. But yeah, thank you guys for that. And if you do like content around here, consider subscribing, like, turn on notifications, all stuff like that. I really appreciate it. It really helps out a lot. And let's not waste any more of your time. Let's get right into it. So let's start our East first. The West is gonna take a while. Let's start off with the East really quick. Looking at the top of the Eastern Conference, the Bucks right now are standing at the 1 seed at 55-22, but the Celtics are only a game and a half behind the Bucks. And remember Thursday's game, the Celtics absolutely dominated the Bucks. They won by 41 points. It was amazing. The Celtics, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown really took over, and the Celtics really needed that win. They've been struggling a lot recently. They fell to about they're coming into that game. They were like 3 games behind Milwaukee, and now after that win, and then they beat the Jazz last night. They're a game and a half behind the Bucks for that number 1 spot, which is important because if these two teams do match up in the conference finals, home court advantage will be the 1 seed, and just being the number 1 seed, kind of gives you a lot more confidence in there. Yeah, so that's a race you got to watch out for. Looking at the strength of schedule on Tankathon, it's showing every team's schedule, and the higher up ranked you are, the more difficult schedule you have. It takes the teams you have left, their winning percentage. Both these teams are in the top 10 in hardest schedules left. The Bucks have the 7th hardest schedule. Celtics have the 9th hardest schedule. The Celtics still have a game. Well, both Milwaukee and Boston both have a game against Philly left. Philly actually has the hardest schedule left in the NBA. Philly still has to play Boston, Milwaukee, Miami, and Brooklyn, and then they play Atlanta. All playoff / play-in teams. So Boston still has a game against Philly. Both of them still have a game against Philly. Milwaukee has a game against Memphis left, and then all the other games. Milwaukee has a game against Washington, Chicago, Toronto, play-in teams, and Boston has 2 games against Toronto and then a game against Atlanta. So they both kind of have the same-ish kind of schedule against all playoff teams. They don't have to play any of the tanking teams. So Boston has a real chance, especially if the way Memphis is playing right now. If Memphis continues to stay hot, because they're still in the battle for a 1 seed and trying to not lock their seed up as well. That could be a really good game. And then Philly, those are going to be tough games for both of those teams as well. So yeah, the battle, the 1 seed's in there, and then Philly is in there. Philly still has a chance at the 2 seed. Beating Boston and if they win both those games against Boston and Boston and Milwaukee, that would be very helpful. But they do have the toughest schedule left. They have to play Brooklyn, they have to play Miami, 2 teams that are trying to fight to lock in a playoff spot, and then Atlanta as well is still in that race. Yeah, so Philly has a lot to do, but those are going to be the top 3 for sure, most likely. Cleveland still has a chance to jump Philly, but it's going to be tough because Philly has a tiebreaker. And yeah, Cleveland will have to win out every game, and Philly will have to lose out every game, which is probably not going to happen. But the funny thing is about that, actually, Cleveland actually has the easiest schedule left in the NBA. Their last 4 games are all against non-playoff teams. Cleveland's last 4 games are against Charlotte, Indiana, and then Orlando twice. All 3 teams that aren't in the playoff race and they're tanking. So it honestly might happen. Most likely not. But you never know. There's always an opportunity. But yeah, for Cleveland, the rest of the way, they already locked in their playoff spot. New York won last night, which is good for them. New York still has a chance to jump Cleveland as the 4 seed. But, I mean, it'll take a lot. Cleveland does the easiest schedule left, and they should win. Maybe probably 2 or 3 of those last 4 games, depending on who they play, because I wouldn't be surprised if the last 2 games of the season they just set everybody, because there's not really any they're not battling for a top seed or anything. They're kind of just stuck in 4. They're 3.5 games behind Philly, and they're 3 games above New York. So they're pretty locked into that 4 spot, I feel like, right now. Yeah, and then the Knicks at the 5. The Nets are still trying to catch the Knicks. At the 5-6, the Nets are 2.5 games behind New York for that number 5 seed. But honestly, I think the Nets are more worried about Miami down there. They're 2 games above Miami after a 2-game win streak. Miami's on a 3-game losing streak. Yeah, so Brooklyn is in there, that sixth spot, and that sixth spot is important because, of course, that's the cutoff for the plan, and you don't want to be in the plan. The Nets are stuck in there. They're on a 2-game win streak, but you never know with this Brooklyn Nets team. They can go on a 3-game losing streak, and then who knows? Brooklyn, they have a game against Philly left, a game against Minnesota left, and then they have a game against Detroit, Orlando, and Utah as well. And then New York has a game against New Orleans, 2 against Indiana, 1 against Washington. So both the New York teams have easy schedules. The Knicks definitely have the easier one because Brooklyn has to play Philly and Minnesota, who are both playing really well. Miami has actually the third easiest schedule left. Miami has a game against Philly, and then they have games against Detroit, Washington, Orlando, and then Dallas. So some winnable games in there for Miami. Yeah, so we're looking at that spot. But then Miami also has to worry about the 8, 9, 10s catching up because Miami's on a losing streak. Atlanta can't be consistent at all. Really, like they lose one, win one. Atlanta and Toronto are both 38 and 39. They're tied for the 8th spot. Atlanta has a tiebreaker over them. Atlanta still has a chance at the 7th spot. So does Toronto, but Atlanta has the 4th hardest schedule left. Atlanta still has a game against Boston and Philly left. And then they got games against Dallas, Chicago, Washington, and then Toronto. Oh no, Toronto actually has the 3rd hardest schedule left. Toronto still has 2 games against Boston, a game against Milwaukee, and then they have 2 games against Charlotte. So wow, yeah, both of those teams really are in for some big ones, especially Toronto. 2 against Boston and 1 against Milwaukee left, and both of them are still trying to play for their spot. Those 2 are going to be battling out, and then you got the 10 seed Chicago in there. Chicago is a game behind both those teams. Chicago's 37 and 40. Chicago has a game against Milwaukee left. They have a game against Memphis. Then they have a game against Atlanta, Detroit, and Dallas. So that Atlanta game will be big for them. But then, yeah, after that, the plan is pretty much locked in for the East, I feel like. Washington is 11, and the Washington's 3 games behind Chicago, and it looks like they kind of given up on their season. So is Indiana. And then Orlando is technically still in it, but Orlando literally needs to win every game, and Chicago needs to lose every game. Orlando's schedule left. Orlando has 2 games against Cleveland, a game against Brooklyn, Miami, Detroit. Yeah, I mean Orlando could come out and win any given night, but they're probably not winning the rest of the year. So yeah, the Eastern Conference playoff and play-in is locked in. The teams are locked in. It's just more about the seeding and who gets who. So yeah, definitely a good race to watch. The top of the East at least. The play-in and playoff stuff is cool, but we don't really care that much about it. But now, let's go to the West, because the West, there's something. Denver's been number 1 in the West basically for a lot of the year recently. They're 51 and 26, but they're on a 2-game losing streak, and Memphis is only 2 games behind. Memphis is playing really, really well. They just beat the Clippers last night, a big comeback after getting blown out by the Clippers the game before. But yeah, Memphis has been playing real well. Memphis is now only 2 games behind Denver. Memphis has the 10th hardest schedule left. They still have to play against everyone's got to play against Milwaukee. Jeez. Memphis has to play Milwaukee and New Orleans. And then they also have a game against Portland, OKC, and Chicago. So they're decent. Denver has a pretty easy schedule. Well, that's funny. It's 22nd, but Denver still has to play against Sacramento, Phoenix, and Golden State. And then they have a game against Houston and Utah. But, yeah, those are going to be really tough games for Denver. Memphis is right in there. Only 2 games behind Memphis. And the Sacramento is still only 2 games behind Memphis as well. Sacramento still has a game against Denver. They have Golden State, New Orleans. Then they have games against Dallas and San Antonio. Yeah, it's kind of the same in the West. The top 3 is kind of locked in. It's just what their seeding is going to be at. And that battle for the 1 is interesting. Because Memphis beating the 1 seed, Denver falling down to 2, might be get a little bit even harder for them. Because they might have to play a Laker or a Warrior team at 7. Well, they still could play them at 8 because of how close the West Conference play-in is. But yeah, that'd be interesting. The Sacramento, they could still move up to the 2 seed. It's going to be tough because they need Memphis to lose out some games. Can they be? Sacramento still has a chance for the 1 seed. They would have to win every game, though, and have Denver lose and hope Memphis loses as well, which probably isn't going to happen. But yeah, Sacramento's in there. But Sacramento, they're good. They're good. And they're also locked in, probably basically locked into the top 3 because they're 5 games above Phoenix, who are on a 4-game winning streak. But, well, technically they can tie Sacramento and Phoenix. I don't know who has the tiebreaker on that. But yeah, Phoenix is in that 4th spot. They're a game and a half above the Clippers and the Warriors. They're on a 4-game winning streak. Kevin Durant is back, and they look amazing. They just beat the Nuggets last night, even though the Nuggets basically didn't play anybody. But the Suns still won. The Suns still have a game against Denver, and they have a game against both LA teams. And then they have San Antonio and OKC to play against as well. So yeah, those are going to be some good games, especially the both LA ones. Speaking of LA, the Clippers and Warriors are tied for the 5 and 6 spot. Both at 41 and 37. That's a big game. That's big. Being that 4-5, because that 5 has to play against the Suns and that 6 has to play against Sacramento. Two very tough teams, but I feel like teams would rather play Sacramento than Phoenix, especially with the way Phoenix looks right now with Kevin Durant. But Sacramento is no slouch either. We all know Sacramento. A lot of teams saying they want to play Sacramento, especially the Warriors, which is funny because right now, if the season were to end, the Warriors would play Sacramento in the first round. But the Kings, don't take the Kings lightly. You cannot take the Kings lightly. But yeah, the Warriors are playing really, really good. As of recently, Steph is back. Clay's been hitting. They look very, really good. And the Warriors, their schedule, they have the 6th hardest schedule. They still have a game against Denver and Sacramento, but then they have games against OKC and Portland as well. Yeah. And then you go down to the play-in. Lakers and Pelicans right now are tied for the 7 and 8 spot. They're both 39 and 38. Lakers got a really big win last night against Minnesota. And New Orleans has been on fire the last 2 weeks. Brandon Ingram has looked amazing. And they're back over 500 in the play-in. Looking at the schedule, New Orleans has the 2nd toughest schedule left. New Orleans has wow, yeah, they have a tough schedule. New Orleans has games against Memphis, Sacramento, New York, the Clippers, and Minnesota. All teams that are playoff teams. And yeah, like 4 of those 5 teams are playoff teams, and the other one is a team fighting against them for the play-in. So yeah, New Orleans has a tough schedule left. And then the Lakers left. Lakers have actually one of the easier schedules. They have a game against Phoenix and the Clippers, but then they have 2 games against the Jazz and a game against the Rockets left. So Lakers have a really good chance of making it in to that play-in. Of course, they still have to go out and win those games. Nothing is a given. But yeah. And then you got the 9 down there. You got Minnesota, who lost. They're on a 2-game losing streak. They're 39 and 39. They're a half game behind New Orleans and a game above OKC. Minnesota has the 2nd easiest schedule left. They play against Brooklyn and New Orleans. Then they have games against Portland and San Antonio, which should be 2 guaranteed wins. With how those 2 teams are playing right now, those should be 2 guaranteed wins. But you never know. But yeah, that game against New Orleans will be huge. New Orleans and Minnesota, that's a big game. And then you got 10. OKC is 38 and 40, a tough loss last night to Indiana. OKC has the 5th hardest schedule left. OKC still has games against Memphis, Phoenix, Golden State, and then they have a Utah game. So yeah, OKC's got a tough way in there. And then Dallas is a half game behind OKC at 37-40. They have a game tonight against Miami. That's big for them. And they still have against Sacramento. But then they have a game against Atlanta, Chicago, San Antonio left. Then Utah technically still in it, but Utah I feel like doesn't want to be in it. Utah's only a half game behind Dallas and a game and a half behind OKC for that last play-in spot. Utah, their schedule, they have 2 games against the Lakers. They have a game against Brooklyn, Denver, and OKC. They probably want to go out and lose all those games. Which I won't be surprised if they do lose all those games. But yeah, Utah's technically still in it, but they don't really want to be in it. So really, it's down to an 11-man race for the 10 spots in the West. And yeah, very crazy. Looking at schedules, the Lakers should be locked in there. I feel like 2 games against Utah or Houston, Lakers should be locked in there while they're playing. After that, it gets pretty. New Orleans, it gets really, really tough because New Orleans has literally again all 5 games against playoff teams. Depending on where they are, also as well though, because at that point maybe Memphis already locked in the 2 seeds, so they don't play anybody, or maybe the Knicks are already locked in their spots, so they don't have to play anybody. But yeah, that New Orleans Minnesota game is gonna be big. I'm definitely watching that game because that's a huge game in the play-in race. It's going to be tough for OKC as well if they have games against Memphis, Phoenix, Golden State. The way they're all playing right now, Phoenix and Golden State are still playing for something. So those 2 are going to be really tough games. But OKC has the defense and they have the talent to go out and win those games as well. But yeah, Dallas. And Dallas really has to take this. Dallas has San Antonio. They have Chicago, Atlanta. It's very tough to say that they should win those games because they look so bad. But I mean, they definitely can't. I mean, they're only a half game out. Like, they win tonight and they're tied with OKC for that last play-in spot. I don't know who has the tiebreaker. We would have to see. I don't know who has the tiebreaker in that advantage and matchup. But yeah, that's a big game for Miami too, because Miami loses this game, they're only a game and a half above Atlanta, and they fall further and further away from Brooklyn, which is they more want to catch Brooklyn than fall to Atlanta, because Brooklyn's that 6th spot, man. If they get that 6, they get a matchup against Philly, which is probably a better matchup that they want than against Boston or Milwaukee, and they don't want to be extra play games in the play-in. They want to get out of there. Yeah, they're on a losing streak, and they're falling further and further away. If they lose today, that'd be a big loss. Miami schedule, again, they still have a game against Philly, but they have this third easiest schedule. They got Detroit, Washington, and Orlando. After tonight, they have Detroit, Washington, Orlando, and then one game against Philly. They should be able to win all 3 of those games against those 3 teams, Detroit, Orlando, Washington. They should be able to win those games. It's not a guarantee, though. But yeah, this is just a little video talking about the braces and seeing how crazy it is and what teams are still playing for. Very exciting, and I'm all here for it. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy. Once again, if you do like content around here, consider subscribing, like, turn on notifications, all the stuff like that. Really appreciate it. Really helps out a lot. And I will see you guys tomorrow.